Hey guys, welcome back. I hope you are having an amazing day. Let's get right into the stories. The first one is a pro-revenge story. I was pushing 50 and I'd learned a lot of lessons in more than 15 years of legal practice. But one of the most important lessons I learned was from an older lawyer that I worked for as a summer intern after the second year of law school. A lawyer has 3 duties, she told me. First to herself, second to the court, and last, the client. Always make sure you come first and the client comes last. The reason? Because clients will screw you over, she said. They'll throw you under the bus without thinking twice. I should have stayed with this lawyer, but being young and naive, I had to go work downtown, and I'm still downtown now, but fortunately for me, I remembered this lesson, and it came in handy many years later when a client really did try to throw me under the bus. My client was this mid-sized tech company that developed software and owned a few data centers, not big enough to be listed, but it did have a pretty sizable IT infrastructure portfolio, and one day their main data center suffered a massive power surge that fried most of their servers. The company wanted to collect on the insurance, so they told Greg, a veteran IT manager, to deal with it. Greg was in his late 50s and thought he knew what he was doing. He didn't need me to help him with the insurance claim, he told me. He had everything under control. Besides, lawyers are expensive. Some guys really get off on not paying legal fees. And Greg was one of those guys who gloated over every penny that he managed not to pay to the lawyers. I dealt with Greg a lot, and he was always nickel and diming me. The insurer is gonna screw you over, I told Greg one day over the phone. You don't know that, he replied dismissively. I could tell he just wanted to get me off the phone. Greg, listen to me. I'm paid to know when insurers are trying to screw my clients, I said, my frustration growing. And this insurer is going to screw you. They've been stringing you along for ages with requests and questions and paperwork, but they aren't going to pay you. Not unless you sue them. But Greg insisted, look, I know what I'm doing, it's all under control, and besides, I get along with the adjuster so great. The limitation period expires in 2 weeks, I pressed on, and once that 2 weeks pass, it will be too late to sue. The moment that limitation period expires, they will stop taking your calls. You'll get a final email saying, sorry, you're out of time, and that will be that. Don't leave this till the last minute. Let me sue right now, and you'll have the money in no time. Greg was like, sure, fine, whatever, don't bother me. I got this. And he got off the phone as soon as he could. I sent him the usual email with clear warnings and recommendations, which he ignored. I sent the email again and then again as the limitation period approached, and again a couple of days before the deadline. I'm going to be at a conference and you won't be able to reach me, my final email said. But you have to sue. You have other firms on your list, so pick one and sue. He didn't bother to reply and I went off to my conference. The conference lasted a couple of weeks and no email from Greg. Then a month passed and another month, still no email. I figured he must have sorted things out. Maybe Greg was right after all, I said to myself, and then my phone rang. It was Greg. Remember that data center insurance thing we spoke about? We'd only spoken about it like a dozen times. I figured he was calling up to gloat, so I cut to the chase. So they paid out. That's great, Greg. You were right. There was a pause on the line before Greg asked, what are you talking about? Can I see a copy of the claim? What claim? I said, a sinking feeling in my stomach. The claim against the insurer. You know, that claim. Does that mean the insurer didn't pay? I said. He hung up on me, and then a few minutes later my computer dinged, and there was Greg's email talking about how we spoke, and he told me to sue, and he was worried when I hadn't sent him a copy of the claim, so he was following up to get a copy of the claim. I emailed him back. I take it that the insurer didn't pay you, just like I told you they wouldn't, and now that the limitation period is expired, they told you to jump in the lake, leaving you with a loss in the millions. Is that it? I'd made a mistake by not going over Greg's head when he wouldn't listen to me, but if I'd gone over Greg's head, I never would have received another file from him, so I didn't. But that was then, and this was now, so I CC'd Greg's boss and his boss's boss, plus I CC'd Sarah, the client's in-house counsel. Sarah acknowledged my email right away and called me later that day. Greg messed up, she said, her voice tense. We know that. He's an idiot. So what do we do? So his excuses didn't work? Not even close. Sarah explained that they'd summoned Greg to a boardroom, but his story didn't add up, given all the warnings I'd sent him. Besides, there would have been no reason for him to keep emailing the insurer if he'd told me to sue. Once the file goes to legal counsel, Greg's role was over. The company knew Greg was bullcrapping them. So that's it then? Sarah said, her voice filled with resignation. We just lost a couple of $1 million? It's okay, I said, explaining that when I realized that Greg was going to mess up, I issued a claim against the insurer. Because I'd made Greg send me the proof of loss a while earlier, I had enough information that I could sue to preserve the cause of action. Not a great claim and short on details, but good enough. You sued without instructions, Sarah said, her tone a mix of surprise and concern. Lawyers aren't supposed to sue without instructions because if you do that, you're personally liable for whatever cost the other side incurs. It's a big deal to sue without instructions. Yup, I said. I sued without instructions. I pulled up a copy of the claim and emailed it to her as we spoke. It's a little rough, I said, but we can always amend. Thank God, Sarah exclaimed. Can I leave it with you? Of course she could. The insurer was a sitting duck, and I knew I'd collect from them no problem. A few days later, I got a call from another guy who worked for the client, a guy I didn't normally deal with. They had a situation and needed my help. I usually deal with Greg, I said. What's up? What was up was that Greg got called into another meeting, and they handed him a one-page letter, and then he put his little office things in a box, and security walked him past his coworkers to the elevator and escorted him downstairs to the parking lot. Bye-bye, Greg. He was too old to get another job, or at least not a decent one. It was a life-changing event for Greg, but for me, he was just an anecdote, a cautionary tale that I tell young lawyers sometimes over drinks, maybe too often, because I'm getting on in years and I have my favorite stories. I wasn't trying to get revenge on Greg, not at all, and I would have felt a bit sorry for him if he hadn't been trying to throw me under the bus. But the guy who replaced him was great, and never nickel and dimed me, so it all worked out in the end. The next one is an entitled people's story. I never thought I'd end up being the hero in a story like this, but life has a funny way of throwing you into situations you least expect. My name's Jake, and up until a few months ago, I was just your average software developer at TechCorp, a mid-sized tech company in Seattle. It all started when our department got a new manager, Karen. From day one, we all knew she was trouble. She strutted into the office like she owned the place. Designer heels clicking on the linoleum floor, her perfectly styled blonde hair bouncing with each step. Karen made it clear she was here to whip us into shape and trim the fat. We all exchanged worried glances, wondering who'd be first on the chopping block. Turns out, it was Margaret. Margaret had been with the company for over 20 years. She was in her early 60s and had a degenerative eye condition that made it hard for her to see. The company had always accommodated her, giving her special equipment and flexible hours. She was brilliant, responsible for some of our most successful patents. Everyone loved Margaret. She was like the office grandma, always ready with a kind word or a homemade cookie. One day, I overheard Karen talking to HR. Margaret's too slow. She can't keep up with the pace we need, plus all that special equipment is costing us a fortune. It's time to let her go. I couldn't believe what I was hearing. I wanted to burst in and defend Margaret, but I knew it wouldn't do any good. Karen had made up her mind. The next day, Margaret came into work like usual. Karen called her into her office. We all watched, holding our breath. When Margaret came out, her eyes were red and puffy. She started packing up her desk. I couldn't just stand by and watch. I went over to her. Margaret, what happened? She looked up at me, her magnified eyes brimming with tears behind her thick glasses. Karen, she fired me, said I wasn't meeting performance standards, but Jake, you know that's not true. I've been working harder than ever. I nodded, anger building in my chest. We all know that, Margaret. This isn't right. Margaret sighed, her shoulders slumping. There's more. Karen said, she said all my patents belong to the company now. Everything I've created over the past 20 years. She said it was all in my contract. That didn't sound right to me. I knew a bit about intellectual property law from some classes I took in college. Margaret, do you have a copy of your contract? She nodded, pulling out a thick folder from her desk drawer. I keep everything. I spent my lunch break poring over Margaret's contract. It was pretty standard stuff until I got to the section about intellectual property. There was a clause that said any patents developed using company resources belonged to the company. But there was an addendum, initialed by the former CEO, that made an exception for Margaret. It stated that due to her long-standing relationship with the company and her unique contributions, she would retain partial ownership of any patents she developed. This was huge. Karen couldn't just take Margaret's patents like that. I knew I had to do something, but I also knew I had to be smart about it. I couldn't just accuse Karen of wrongdoing without proof. Over the next few weeks, I started gathering evidence. I talked to other employees who had overheard Karen's conversations. I made copies of relevant documents. I even recorded a conversation where Karen bragged about how she was going to sell Margaret's patents and make a fortune. All the while, Margaret was struggling. She'd been denied unemployment because Karen had cited misconduct as the reason for her termination. She was having trouble finding a new job at her age, especially with her disability. It broke my heart to see her suffering like this. Finally, I felt I had enough evidence. I took everything I had gathered to the company's legal department. At first, they were skeptical. After all, I was just a lowly developer going up against a department manager. But as they went through the evidence, their attitudes changed. The next day, there was a flurry of activity in the office. Karen was called into a meeting with the CEO and the legal team. She came out looking pale and shaken. An hour later, security was escorting her out of the building, carrying a box of her personal items. The CEO called an all-hands meeting. He explained that Karen had been fired for gross misconduct. She had violated company policy and potentially broken the law by trying to steal Margaret's patents. The company was bringing Margaret back, with full back pay and a formal apology. But it didn't end there. Word got out about what Karen had tried to do. Other tech companies in the area heard about it and blacklisted her. The last I heard, she was working as a shift manager at a fast food joint. As for Margaret, she came back to a hero's welcome. The CEO personally apologized to her and offered her a promotion. She turned it down, saying she was happy where she was. But she did accept a hefty raise and a new state-of-the-art computer setup to help with her vision issues. The company implemented new policies to prevent something like this from happening again. They started a mentorship program where older employees could share their knowledge with younger ones. They also improved their accommodations for employees with disabilities. As for me, I got a promotion too. The CEO was impressed with how I had handled the situation. I'm now heading up a new department focused on ethical technology practices. Looking back, I'm glad I spoke up. It would have been easier to keep my head down and stay out of it. But sometimes you have to take a stand, even if it's scary. Margaret taught me that over the years, and I'm grateful I had the chance to repay her kindness. The whole experience changed the company culture for the better. We're more collaborative now, more supportive of each other, and every now and then when things get stressful, Margaret still brings in her homemade cookies. Some things never change, and I'm thankful for that. The next one is a petty revenge story. I'm not sure if this is actually petty revenge, straight up revenge, or just justice. So my friend went through a nasty divorce and he lost a lot. Anyhow, he was in a very bad custody battle for his daughter. The judge was very biased. My friend showed pictures of her place with weed and other drug paraphernalia on her coffee table when he picked his daughter up during the court case. The judge told him and his crappy lawyer at the time he had no right to take pictures in her house. His crappy lawyer said nothing and he got reprimanded for his outburst. After he told myself and other friends of this, we all pooled money together to get him a better lawyer. That lawyer petitioned for another judge. Here's where my petty revenge came in. I have a coworker who is dirty as hell. He sees escorts all the time and brags about them at work. He shows pictures and videos of all the escorts he sees. My coworker has hidden cameras all over his apartment. I normally don't care about my coworker's escapades. But one day, my coworker kept bothering about his new super hot escort, so cave and look at his new video. Lo and behold, it's my friend's ex. I tell my coworker I'd like a copy of the video. He had no shame and sent it to me. I forwarded it to my friend, but his new lawyer says it's just a sex video with no context. They need proof of her escorting. So I went back to my coworker and asked how he met her, and he gave me her Leah List ad. My friend's lawyer said he needed more because anyone can post an ad. So, through myself and other friends, we pooled enough money for a PI. It took 2 months, but we got enough evidence of her escorting and dealing drugs with her crappy new BF. He has full custody now and she is in jail, not for escorting or dealing, but for child abuse and neglect. The next one is a malicious compliance story. Backstory: another story about Sam and Murad. My manager, Sam, is extremely chill and an outstanding leader. His manager, Murad, is a stickler for the rules. I work as infrastructure and configuration manager. I also love automation and automate everyday tasks for myself, my team, and sometimes management as well. Most of management loves it. Murad is not a fan though. He wants me to focus on my own work and he loves doing things manually. Story: This is from November 2022. My son had been ill for 2 weeks. He is on the mend, but requires constant monitoring to take his meds and fluids every hour. You cannot expect that discipline from a toddler. I have taken a leave for a week to focus on his recovery. In my absence, Sam has been handling most of my work. I check and reply to mails at the end of the day. I am not required to do this, and Sam asks me not to, but I do it anyway, just to get ahead of potential issues the project might face due to my absence. At the end of the week, a management meetup is scheduled. Now, only management, team managers, scrum masters, system architects, is required for the call, but this type of management meetup is a potential goldmine for automation ideas, so I usually join in. In the previous 3 months, by joining this monthly meeting and taking automation ideas that came out of them, I had saved the project and management 100 hours of cumulative work weekly. The meeting starts on Friday morning. It's a regional holiday for a lot of people, so most have joined from home. About 20 people have joined. I have joined as well from my home. My son is seated beside me, and I am teaching him how to play chess. The meeting doesn't really take a lot of focus from me, so my son doesn't mind. He is actually fascinated by most of my work, even though he is too young to understand any of it. Most of my teammates and Sam knows my son, having interacted with him during several calls. Suddenly, Murad joins the call. He is usually never in this call, as he rarely gets along with the agenda or the way the call usually goes. The demeanor is usually pretty casual. People calling each other by names instead of official salutations. People talking in native languages sometimes. Murad, being everyone's boss, and having a giant pole up his rear, commands a serious tone from every meeting he is in. However, on this very occasion, it seems he wants to join in on the casual camaraderie. He wants everyone to turn on their cameras. Everyone takes a minute, and the screen starts to light up with everyone's video. It seems most have hastily put on a formal shirt. Sam chimes in asking me to keep my camera off because it's not required. Murad cuts in. The conversation goes like this. Sam: OP, you can keep your camera off, it's not required, Murad. OP is here? Must be to take minutes. He can turn his camera on as well. Me: actually, I am on leave today. I joined in case my input is needed for any automation. Murad: that's fine, but please turn on your camera. It would be good for everyone to see everyone else. I turn my camera on. Both my son and I and the chessboard between us is visible. I am using a wide-angle camera. My T reads, I work for money, for loyalty, hire a dog. Murad's face was at its widest, and it came to rest after 6 seconds with a reduction rate of 1 mm. The rest of the conversation goes like this. Murad: OP, that T is not office appropriate. Me: it is quite appropriate for home, though, where I currently am. Murad: you also seem to be playing chess. I would suggest you take your work seriously. Please focus on the matter at hand. Me: you are right. I should focus. Disconnect. In a call later, Sam said that while he explained to Murad that I was on leave, at that moment, in front of 20 other people, the sound of my disconnection felt surreal. It's 2024, my automations have saved the project 430 hours and the company 250 hours weekly. Murad never joins that call anymore. The next one is an entitled people's story. I build scale model ships because I'm lame. Unfortunately, the genre is dominated by often angry boomers who seem to think that the rest of us owe them everything because they managed to get old. Specifics. I have a lot of rare resin kits I've collected over the years and have decided to offload some stuff that were mostly impulse buys. I checked eBay's sold auctions and other examples of recent sales and priced my items accordingly. I paid for a vendor booth at a show. Folks were cool for the most part. Many did bargain with me, and that's okay. I sold some bundles and moved on reasonable offers. Q and this old bastard who evidently was alive purely on his own self-persecution and bitterness. The guy saw a large resin model kit of a Japanese battleship that I had priced at $375. This was the original retail with recent sales well north of $400. He came by a few times. He grumbled about my prices being too high for people on fixed income. I just ignored him. Toward the end of the show, he came back to my booth and offered me $100 for it. I flatly refused. He told me he'd always wanted that kit, would build it, and that he's a disabled veteran that feels better when he builds. I was unsurprised given his previous whining at my booth and prior shows. I'm not joking when I say he tends to walk even more laboriously when trying to rip off a vendor. I told him thank you for your service. I told him I'd sell him the kit for $325 cash, which is what I paid for it. The dude flew into a rage, accused me of disrespecting veterans. He then told me in my face that I take advantage of old people who don't have the money for expensive things. Note, the dude has gout breath. If you know, you know. I reminded him that this is a hobby, not his home, not his food bill, not his transportation. After calling me everything but a white boy, the man kicks my vendor table and stomps away like a petulant 6th grader. Worst part? I had other entitled boomer modelers asking me why I couldn't work with him because of aforementioned reasons. They were less antagonistic, but the apologetics were clear. These same people wonder why younger folk don't attend scale model shows or why it's becoming increasingly hard to find vendors who don't simply use an online auction or marketplace. I'm all down with giving deals, but trying to guilt someone into compliance is pretty awful. I do hope Gout Breath found some $20 model to keep him satisfied. Thank you for watching. I would really appreciate it if you could like the video and subscribe to our channel if you haven't already. We'll see you again tomorrow.